Just well, welcome everyone to the SWAN webinar. We just first, a lot of people know, but I'll just do a quick background on SWAN. So SWAN is an organization. We're here to promote agroforestry in the southwestern United States, particularly the states of Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. So we try to have a webinar, have guest speakers on every quarter, and we also have an annual conference. Last year was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then, or this year was in Santa Fe, and next year will be in somewhere in Utah to be determined. So stay tuned for that announcement. But we really want to thank Devon for presenting today. Devon is an assistant director of partnerships at the Savanna Institute, and she's going to tell us about the Agroforestry Coalition. So let's welcome Devon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Casey. Again, my name is Devon Brock-Montgomery, and I am calling today out of Madison, Wisconsin. I'm the Assistant Director of Partnerships for the Savanna Institute. And so the work of the Savanna Institute is to sort of lay the groundwork for widespread agroforestry in the Midwest. And a little bit later, I'll get into the relationship between Savanna Institute and the Agroforestry Coalition as well. So before I sort of get into it, I just want to talk about the three things that I'm going to be covering today. So the first one is sort of the most obvious. What is the Agroforestry Coalition? After that, I'll talk a little bit about the work that has already taken place and is also underway by members of the Agroforestry Coalition, and then sort of leave you with an idea about how you can get involved or engage with the coalition. And I'm really hoping that we're going to have some time at the end to kind of do a back and forth. I really want to hear, what excites you, what resonates with you, and any potential future collaboration that we could have. So with that, I will get into it. I'm not going to dwell on this slide for very long, given the audience. I always like to sort of define agroforestry in every presentation that we do. So I'm just going to leave this here. There's the 5 practices that are USDA recognized: silvopasture, alley cropping, forest farming, riparian buffers, and windbreaks. And the Agroforestry Coalition creates a national space for those conversations. So we're kind of working as an accelerator across the United States for agroforestry. And we provide peer-to-peer learning, we provide collective advocacy, and also space and resources for incubating projects and sort of bringing them to life. And the intersection of the Savanna Institute is that the Savanna Institute is sort of the host organization for the coalition right now. And since it started in 2022, it's been, sort of stewarded by us. We provide strategic, administrative, and fundraising support. And that's the reason that I'm here to talk to you guys about the coalition today. There is absolutely the possibility that we will be moving the coalition either to a sort of own sort of separate independent entity, or maybe it fledges and finds a home somewhere else. But for now, it's based at Savanna Institute. And that's all I'm going to say about SI at this point. And right now, we're just going to move forward with strictly the coalition. So some background about the coalition. In June of 2022, VCI, so the Volgina Climate Initiative, hosted a retreat called Scaling Agroforestry in New York State. And to the right, you can see the group of people who took part in that initial conversation. And what the goal of that was to talk about the most clear obstacles to agroforestry nationally. And we're actually going to get into those as they were perceived by this group and also the coalition in a little bit. But taking those obstacles, that fall, the working groups were formally launched as part of the Agroforestry Coalition. We started with 7, we have 8 now, and they're each based on one of the topics or the obstacles to establishing agroforestry and perennial systems here in the United States. The following October, we had found enough momentum that we launched our website, and we actually formed our steering committee. This past fall, we had our second round of steering committee elections, and we formalized with the governance documents. And just last month, that steering committee met in person for the first time in Spring Green, Wisconsin, at one of our demonstration farms. And so you can see, we've been doing this for about 4 years now. And I'll spoil it and let you know that there's about 280 people involved from about 120 different organizations. So we're about 4 years in, and we've grown pretty quickly, and it's been a really wonderful time, and we're looking forward to seeing what comes next. And as you'll see in, I would say, most presentations these days, this idea of the three-legged stool of resilience is a huge part of the perspective that we want to give and provide space for regarding agroforestry. So we look at ecological resilience, we look at social resilience, and then also economic resilience. And so ecological resilience is fairly straightforward. We're looking at diversity on the landscape and the benefits that agroforestry can provide. Social resilience is really underpinned by having as many voices involved as possible here. We want to avoid siloing ourselves or getting separate, because agroforestry in some ways or in some areas can be seen as sort of a niche field. We don't feel that way at all. So we want to get as many people in the room as we possibly can. And then the economic resilience is creating supply chains and income streams to support the providers and the technical assistance providers and the producers that actually do this work on the ground and make sure that it's feasible for them economically. So we are working to bridge these three spheres by, like I mentioned, kind of working as a collaborator. And what I think is really important to mention is the Agroforestry Coalition is made up not just of academics or folks from nonprofits like me. We have people from finance, we have people from policy, there are local governments involved, there are folks from the humanities involved. It really is a holistic space, and that's very intentional. And we're hoping to leverage this to support the industry. So yes, who we are a coalition of agroforestry leaders and practitioners, and we work across sectors to support agroforestry in the United States. And we've grown fairly quickly, as I've mentioned. So we're sitting at about 280 members right now, consisting of 120 organizations within that membership. And we have 8 working groups. And I'm going to be getting into each of the working groups separately in just a minute. I also want to shout out to the steering committee members. And so they're listed here. I'm not going to read off all of their names, but I think it's really worth noticing the sort of variety of different organizations and partners that you're going to be seeing mentioned here today, as well as the regions from which they are coming from. And I really appreciate the invitation to kind of speak to everybody at SWAN. You're very well known for your work, especially in policy, and we want to make sure that there's adequate representation on the Agroforestry Coalition from folks in the Southwest. So we're really eager to welcome you to join. And who knows, maybe somebody could be on the steering committee. It would be really nice to have a representative from out west. So let's talk about the working groups. There are 8 working groups, and they all function independently as sort of a community of practice. And so they each have 2 co-chairs, and people with interest in that topic connect and work together. And it's very flexible by design. So there are some groups that only meet quarterly, some meet every month. It really is dependent on the cadence that works best for their work and for their co-chairs. And so before I get into the actual work of the working groups themselves, I want to share some context as to what the folks at that agroforestry retreat in New York in 2022 had outlined as the obstacles to agroforestry. So they noted a lack of education and demonstration sites to show the public what this looks like and why it's important. A real shortage of seedling and sapling supply, and sort of a general lack of or low nursery stock. There was conversation about financial tools for investing in agroforestry. As we know, perennial plantings can be a little more expensive on the front end, And it's just sort of a different dynamic than we'll see in a lot of the annual cropping rotations that are pretty predominant where I live here in the Midwest. And then once those products are actually in the ground, we noticed a significant shortage of marketing and processing facilities for those products. If there's nowhere for them to go or for them to be sort of transformed into the product that is actually going to be sold, that there's no reason for producers and farmers to actually put that in and move in that direction. There are a number of different organizations across the country working in agroforestry, but we also wanted to see if more consistent and standardized data on implementation on a national scale was possible. I want to give a particular shout out to one of the, I think just like the most wonderful organizations in agroforestry, and also people who have already been doing this work nationally, and that would be the National Agroforestry Center. They have been wonderful partners to us, and as I know, many other people, and they've really been kind of holding the line on that national agroforestry data. But that said, it can be expanded on and improved even more. So after that, we saw there was not a lot of technical assistance training. So we knew that technical assistance providers or technical service providers were the bottleneck. If there's interest there, that's great. We know that. We have, very well documented waiting lists of farmers in numerous states, and I can share that information. But then the next step was actually having people who were trained to put in those systems and to design those systems. And so the sort of last step where we are here is making sure that there's culturally relevant technical assistance and training to get those TAs and TSPs on the ground. Last up, and this is more policy facing, there is no agreed upon definition of agroforestry in US statute at this point. I find that a lot of folks kind of use the 5 USDA practices. There's a lot of variety, but that's a really good example of something that's fairly straightforward, that's not actually, written down in statute. And then lastly, we have continuity and clarity regarding certification of technical assistance or technical service providers or qualified individuals. I mean, you can see from that last part there's, all of these different terms that we can call people who are designing and supporting these practices. But there isn't a lot of continuity between them or transparency as to what the similarities or differences are in their training and certification. So with that, this is the list of the 8 working groups that are part of the Agroforestry Coalition. I'm going to be getting a little bit into each one and the work that they're working on now, some current projects. And ahead of that, I just want to talk about some previous work more generally to kind of set the stage for where we've been. So when the Agroforestry Coalition launched, a speakers bureau was developed. And essentially this was meant to be a clearinghouse of people who could speak about agroforestry to the press, pretty much to anybody who has interest in this topic. And as a note, we are always accepting submissions for people who would like to volunteer to be on this speakers bureau. Right now there's about 50 people. And as you can see, it'll have your name, it'll see what you do, and then some tags about what your expertise is. And so this is a really good way and also a central place to, sorry, there's some sirens coming by. We'll just go for it. Sorry about that. So the Speakers Bureau is just a really good central place to kind of bring people together and visually see people who can be depended on and are totally open to being reached out about agroforestry. Previously, there has been a mini grant program that was partnered on with the Nature Conservancy. 3 pilot projects were funded under that. Some Kyrgyzstani apple work, some chestnut propagation, et cetera, has already taken place. This is all more policy facing. These are some of the accomplishments that they've particularly been able to do. They have undertaken a Washington, D.C. fly-in to go speak with lawmakers and legislators in person about why this is important. They've drafted 2 marker bills in the Farm Bill. And I think one of the best resources that we have is this white paper that was drafted that if you're interested in taking a look at it, it's on the Agroforestry Coalition website, and I can also email it to you. But essentially that was a policy document about what our recommendations are in the Farm Bill for resilient agriculture. And so you can see that right over here. And then also we have a shortened one-page executive summary. So if you want to take a look, please let me know. I'd be happy to send it over to you. Okay, let's get into some current projects. I'm just going to go working group by working group. And what I'm hoping is that this will illustrate the sort of breadth of the partners and the projects that are underway, and also kind of get people thinking about how this relates to their work and how the Agroforestry Coalition could potentially support or act as a resource for the work that you're doing. So starting off strong with the policy working group. They are doing some research with the Harvard Food and Law Policy Clinic about crop insurance data requirements, which sounds pretty in the weeds because it is, as we know, insuring some of these, specialty crops or whatever we're going to call them can be difficult. So this is a step in that direction. The policy group also wrote a formal letter of support for the National Agroforestry Center that other similar like-minded organizations signed on to and submitted. When we saw the federal funding freezes take place, 2 months ago? Time is fake, so much has happened since then. This policy working group was actually able to kind of host 2 calls to talk about that, and not only to see how people are feeling and how agroforestry is being affected by these freezes, but also just kind of come together in a cohesive way and assess some of the really critical infrastructure and strategize on how to protect that when funding was frozen. Lastly, I want to mention that a diversification letter was written, and this was, a collaboration between the National Wildlife Federation, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, the Agri Coalition as well, and it actually ended up with 750 farmer signatories from each state in the country, and then also Puerto Rico. I do also want to mention, unfortunately, the Agri Coalition was hosted at the Meridian Institute, which, as of I think a week ago, closed its doors. So some of the work of the Agri Coalition is going to be looking for a new home. And I just wanted to plant that seed in case anybody has been working with them or is interested in working with them. They do incredible work, and it's been really nice so far. Okay, next up, demonstration farms. So the demonstration farms, their early work was just about figuring out where people were. And so they created this interactive digital map. And the biggest sort of product of that is that this map is now going to be transferred to the Agroforestry Regional Knowledge Exchange called ArcX. And if any of you haven't seen ArcX before, it's a wonderful website. It's run by some of the folks at the Catalyzing Agroforestry program. And so that is its sort of permanent home for now. After a number of discussions, it's just really nice to have that, to know that it's going to be there for a while. And that it's also going to be with another organization that's already doing so much outreach and is also really highly visible. So the Demonstration Farms Working Group also sort of has been an ongoing conversation with the National Association of Conservation Districts about how to support learning and demonstration sites within soil and water conservation districts nationally. So there's a lot of different scales of interest. So the Markets Working Group. This year in August, I believe, they are going to be launching an agroforestry-focused entrepreneurship accelerator in partnership with the Food Finance Institute, which is based out of Madison, Wisconsin, where I am. And it essentially is just going to be 2 simultaneous virtual cohorts of 10 people. And they're going to be moving through an existing curriculum on entrepreneurship that has been updated to include the nuances of working in agroforestry. Once that's taken place, they're also going to be organizing a pitch contest at the Perennial Farm Gathering in 2026 for those accelerator graduates to take part in. Lastly, there was a market development policy research project with the Meridian Institute that I had previously mentioned. And one of the 3 states included in that was actually Colorado. So as we try to figure out what the next steps are for this project, since the Meridian Institute has closed its doors, we really want to make sure that that work continues. And Colorado has been wonderful to work with so far. Moving on to the finance working group, they are essentially developing a proposal to pick up where some of the PCSC, or Project for Climate Smart Commodities grants, left off. And so this is in partnership with the Ecosystem Services Group, which I'll talk about in a moment. But essentially, what happened is there's a lot of MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification work that has to take place for carbon that would have been sequestered by the plantings that would have been part of these Project for Climate Smart Commodities projects. And so now that those are on hold and it's unclear if they'll kind of be opened up again, they want to make sure that that can still be quantified and that all of the work that sort of went into that is not lost. There's also elements that get into, carbon markets and things like that. And so that's sort of why the finance folks are involved, as well as the ecosystem service folks. And then, yeah, moving on strong to them. So they're obviously working on this MRV work, but they also have kind of broken off into a couple of subgroups. And so the first one is measuring biodiversity, and the other one is more focused again on biomass carbon quantification. I am not an expert in this work, and all I can say is that it's deeply, deeply complicated and context specific. And so it's great to have this group. I would say it's primarily academics at this point, kind of doing a really deep dive into how we can measure that across sites and make sure that our estimates are accurate, and that we're just kind of giving, realistic estimates of the work that, or of the carbon that's being sequestered by these plantings. So the biodiversity folks are also pursuing funding and looking for additional sites to undertake bird bioacoustics. That's sort of the work that's been done already. And then as that, we have that, we know how to do that. In future years, that sampling is going to be expanded to aquatic invertebrates and also pollinator surveys. So, and I mentioned it later in the presentation, but again, so they're looking for additional sites. If anybody would be interested in taking part in this could be a really good opportunity. So the Technical Assistance and Training Working Group, so they've basically started this conversation with agroforestry trainers all across the country. And they're comparing what exists, what's needed, and all of these funding timelines and demographics, and it's really, there's quite a lot going on already. And they're bringing everybody together to kind of build out this basic and intermediate agroforestry training that can be replicable across the country. And they're also kind of going to be working through a theory of change process to make sure that they are aligned on how to make that accessible once the curriculum is available. The Nurseries and Germplasm Development Working Group is continuing with the mini grants that I had mentioned before. Another group is putting together a directory for agroforestry nurseries, because it would be very nice if we could just click on a link or look at a page and clearly see where we can source stock for projects, as that has been increasingly a limiting factor for a lot of the afforestation work, agroforestry work, sort of whatever that needs to look like. So hopefully that'll be a really helpful resource. And then they're going to be meeting in December of this year, again, with a retreat hosted by the Volganau Climate Initiative about early supply chain coordination for agroforestry and reforestation. And so that's kind of bringing together those two spheres. Only got a couple left. I'm almost done, I promise. We got the communications working group. And so they are hosting 4 communications workshops this year to make sure that people know how to speak about the work that's being done. Some of that's talking to media, some of that's how to create print materials, giving people the tools that they need to be successful as much as they can. They're undergoing some market research for this Better Berries campaign. And so when we say better berries, we mean generally aronia, elderberry, blackcurrant, and honeyberry. And so that work continues. And there's also the possibility of adding chestnut and hazelnut market research to that team. The new thing that is really getting going this year is this agroforestry storytelling initiative. And so this is a digital platform where stories would be available for the public and for policymakers to educate them, to compel them, and really make this stuff visible. So it's going to be fun to follow along as that really takes place. Okay, so ways to get involved in the Agroforestry Coalition. First of all, it's free. There's no sort of cost to join the Agroforestry Coalition. It literally is as easy as emailing info@agroforestrycoalition.com. I have all of that information later on. We also I talked a little bit about the Speakers Bureau earlier. And so that is a facet of this initiative that we're having to build a bench of agroforestry advocates. And that goal is to make these people visible and accessible for times when we need to move quickly, and essentially creating more cohesion and power amongst the agroforestry group nationally. Again, I know that SWAN has been particularly effective in the policy realm. Please, add your voice to the policy conversation. As I mentioned before, another way you could get involved is, hosting biodiversity research. Or if there's other research that you are wanting to do, let us know. Maybe we could connect you with people who are doing similar work or have similar questions. And yeah, just in general, collaborate on projects to move all of our work forward is what we're looking for. And in 2024, the Agroforestry Coalition had its first in-person meeting that was coupled with the perennial farm gathering here in Madison, Wisconsin. It's very likely that that's going to be happening again. So if you are already a part of the Agroforestry Coalition, or if you're interested in joining it, this is good to keep in mind. We have announced the dates for the 2026 PFG, and that's going to be taking place in Dubuque, Iowa. So it'll be really nice. I also want to say thank you to the supporters of the Agroforestry Coalition. So that would be the Volga Climate Initiative, the Builders Initiative, NRDC, the Better Tomorrow Fund, and the Maine Community Foundation. And I just want to close. I really would love to hear from people about the work that's being done, what is interesting to you, how we could help. And I just want to emphatically welcome you to join us at the Agroforestry Coalition and, move the work forward together. Thank you so much.